A special thank you to each of our subscribers who make this channel possible. Here's today's story. In a dramatic turn of events this week, the Senate has unveiled and passed its version of the much-debated One Big Beautiful Bill Act, a fiscal measure that has sparked outrage and concern among economists and taxpayers alike. With a staggering price tag of $4 trillion, many are questioning whether this bill is a legitimate attempt at tax reform or simply a bipartisan piñata filled with excessive spending, debt, and political gimmicks. The bill, which has already been criticized for its size and scope, is being hailed by some as a necessary step towards economic growth, but the reality is far more complex. Supporters of the bill point to its provisions that make permanent certain pro-growth policies, including 100% bonus depreciation and research and development expensing. While these elements may seem promising, critics argue that they are overshadowed by the sheer volume of negative implications that accompany the legislation. It's akin to admiring a fresh coat of paint on a house that is, quite frankly, on fire. The Senate's version of the bill has trimmed some of the more egregious handouts from the House version, removing or reducing $147 billion in questionable expenditures. However, the Senate has countered this by adding an additional $186 billion in spending, resulting in a net increase of $39 billion in what many are calling pork. This is a classic example of what Washington calls compromise, where the House proposes one amount, the Senate proposes a slightly higher amount, and somehow, the final agreement results in an even larger expenditure. According to a past analysis by the Congressional Budget Office, the budget proposal is set to incur $3.2 trillion in direct costs along with $700 billion in interest payments. This would bring the total new borrowing to a staggering $3.9 trillion. For context, former President Joe Biden took 4 years to add $4.7 trillion to the national deficit. The sheer scale of this spending raises questions about fiscal responsibility and the long-term implications for future generations. The bill also includes a controversial increase in the cap on the state and local tax, SALT, deduction to $40,000, a move that many critics argue primarily benefits the wealthy. Additionally, the legislation is riddled with hundreds of billions in temporary provisions that are widely expected to be extended, further complicating the fiscal landscape. Perhaps most troubling is the blatant disregard for the House's own budget reconciliation instructions, which called for $2 trillion in spending offsets. The House's initial proposal paired $3.8 trillion in tax relief with $1.6 trillion in cuts, while the Senate's version boasts nearly $4.5 trillion in tax cuts but only $1.4 trillion in spending reductions, resulting in a $600 billion breach of previously agreed-upon budgetary constraints. It seems that both parties have lost sight of the importance of aligning taxes with spending. Republicans, once champions of fiscal discipline, now appear more interested in the immediate gratification of tax cuts without regard for long-term consequences. Meanwhile, Democrats advocate for expansive government programs, mistakenly believing that the wealthy can shoulder the entire financial burden. The math simply doesn't add up, and the moral implications of such reckless spending cannot be ignored. Those who frame this bill as pro-growth are relying on unrealistic economic assumptions and budget gimmicks that fail to hold water under scrutiny. An analysis by my colleague suggests that while the pro-growth provisions might yield a mere 1% increase in growth, this is completely negated by the negative impact of extending the SALT cap. In a responsible fiscal environment, tax cuts should be accompanied by corresponding spending reductions. The purpose of the tax code is to generate revenue to fund government operations that Americans demand. If we are unwilling to consider spending cuts, then we must accept the reality of higher taxes and the consequences of slower economic growth. As a proponent of smaller government and reduced debt, it pains me to witness such a blatant disregard for fiscal responsibility. My vision for a more sustainable future includes eliminating subsidies to private companies, returning many functions to state control, and significantly means testing entitlement benefits. Well-designed spending cuts are proven methods to reduce the debt-to-GDP ratio and pave the way for lower taxes. However, we cannot condone a system that prioritizes short-term gains for the current generation while passing the burden of debt onto future taxpayers. If Americans desire a larger government, they must be prepared to pay for it through increased taxes and accept the slower growth that accompanies such decisions. Legislation is a reflection of the priorities of politicians, and it is evident that many are comfortable with jeopardizing the financial futures of upcoming generations in favor of current constituents. The one big beautiful bill may be dressed up as a triumph, but beneath its surface lies a deeply troubling reality that Americans cannot afford to ignore. As we approach the Independence Day holiday, it is crucial to reflect on what true independence means in terms of fiscal freedom and responsibility. This bill, in its current form, represents a dangerous precedent that could have dire consequences for our nation's economic future. That's all for this story. We upload videos every day covering many different subjects, so hit that subscribe button to stay informed. Thanks for watching.